Safety Up podcast. We support developing a safer, sustainable workplace. In this third podcast, we discuss best practices in developing and executing a process to identify foreseeable hazards and risks. We suggest allowing time to acquire worker knowledge without the constraint of an artificial deadline. It takes soak time for participants to think about known unknowns and unknown unknowns.
Mikey, can I ask you questions?
Sure.
Can you explain the concept of soak time in simple terms?
The foundation for a safe workplace begins with identifying hazards that pose risk and then reducing risk to an acceptable level. The good news is that initiatives like human and organizational performance, or HOP, mesh nicely with the goals discussed in this podcast series. HOP is a framework for improving workplace safety by understanding how people work in high-risk environments. It helps to identify hazardous situations that might not be currently known.
I've heard about the relatively new approach known as Human and Organizational Performance, or HOP. How does HOP mesh with what I am listening to?
Unlike traditional models that sometimes pinpoint human error as the primary cause of workplace incidents, HOP emphasizes understanding the systemic factors contributing to occupational injuries and illnesses.
Is HOP different than traditional approaches to injury reduction?
Traditionally, the focus was on pinpointing individual responsibility, often culminating in punitive measures. This view can restrict an organization's ability to best learn and grow from these incidents.
Can you explain further?
Sure. Unlike a risk management program that works to eliminate, mitigate, or substitute risk, HOP assumes that mistakes will happen. In essence, humans try hard, but they're not perfect. No amount of planning or equipment can make them perfect. In contrast, we now understand the critical role of analyzing the broader system in which these errors occur, aligning with research expert W. Edwards Deming's principle that most industrial incidents involve factors beyond human error.
Tell me more about the link between operational excellence and human organizational performance.
HOP recognizes that we are all human, and as human beings, we will make errors. Often, these errors could lead to serious and fatal injuries or SIFs. Studies have shown that SIFs are often tied to very low probability but high severity injury events. Those events are usually not predictable from the most thorough analysis of recordable injuries or even days away from work cases.
Why aren't they predictable?
There currently is no good database that identifies and tracks hazardous situations that could occur. Notice that I said hazardous situations and not hazards. Hazards of machine motion, fall hazards, and confined space hazards are well known and relatively easy to identify. When combined, the hazardous situation that could occur because of a variable in the process, the work method, or other variables are typically unknown. It is this unknown combination that could create a hazardous situation that could lead to a serious or fatal injury. This ties into Deming's concepts of management systems.
Please help me better understand how this ties into Deming's teachings.
According to Dr. Deming, a system is a network of interdependent components that work together to achieve a common aim or purpose. Essentially, it is a collection of interconnected parts that function as a whole with a defined goal in mind. Workers only work within the existing management safety system. They did not design it. Respect for people is demonstrated when management recognizes that workers should not have to fight the system to get necessary tasks completed.
Is there a practical way to get started?
Excellent question. The answer is yes, and relatively simple. It begins with another Dr. Deming principle of respect for people. In this matter, workers generally have the best ability to identify the workplace variables that might create potential exposure to serious or fatal injury.
You mentioned known unknowns and unknown unknowns at the outset. I'm curious about what and how those concepts relate to identifying hazards.
Known unknowns could include identifying tasks where workers do not lock out equipment during service and maintenance. This is a good example because some tasks require power, and locking the primary energy source will not allow the job to be done. Modifying equipment or process design and/or policies or procedures to accommodate recognized task variables will come after identifying issues that could result in SIFs.
What are unknown unknowns?
Unknown unknowns pose a more significant challenge. In this situation, management recognizes neither the hazards nor the tasks that generate significant risk. Complicating this issue is the recognition that serious injuries and fatalities have been associated with unplanned maintenance. Even with small and medium enterprises, such tasks can number in the thousands. With larger employers, unplanned maintenance tasks could easily number in the tens of thousands. Identifying which tasks have the greatest SIF potential becomes even more complicated.
Identifying the potential for serious and fatal injuries is a mystery to me. Please explain more.
The combination of unknown tasks under unknown conditions and circumstances adds to complexity because any one unplanned maintenance task could involve any number of variables, including, but not limited to, the following examples. Guards and engineered controls being necessarily bypassed or suspended. Troubleshooting with power on. Working at heights. Having more than one worker, which can complicate communication. Insufficient light. Use of hazardous materials. Work being performed in a cramped area or confined space. And many more variables.
How can we identify what seems like many different situations that are not currently recognized?
I go back to the same mantra. Only the workers know of these situations, and they will only tell you where existing safety policies do not work or do not exist to cover the real-world variables they face in a culture of trust.
How can I assess if we have such a culture?
What is the first question when there is an injury or near miss and an interlock or other safeguarding device is bypassed? Do you question why the employee bypassed the safeguard, or do you ask what it is about the task that required bypassing? This is a subtle but significant difference.
Please explain further the difference between questioning why a safeguard was bypassed versus understanding the task requirement that made bypass necessary.
The first approach may offer a bias leading to a determination that the employee committed an unsafe act. The second approach is based on respect for people, where teams of people proactively identify issues in an environment of openness and trust. Operators and maintenance personnel may recognize a risk that others in the organization do not recognize. This risk is an unknown unknown to many people, but may be a known unknown to workers performing these tasks.
Can you cite some examples to help me better understand a known unknown risk?
Sure, experience has shown that operators and maintenance may possess knowledge of a risk that is not currently identified, but was identified at some point in the past. Not recognized because it happens during an unplanned breakdown event. Not recognized because it is only when two or variables combine that the risk level elevates substantially.
What can managers and safety professionals do?
Managers and safety professionals should engage on a journey to appreciate why, when, and where variation exists. Once identified, they can understand the necessary deviation from an accepted standard.
What should workers do?
Workers do not create the existing system, they merely work within it. If workers bypass safeguards and continued efforts to correct the problem do not yield results, you might take a macro view to determine where and why deviation from established procedures is necessary to perform certain tasks.
How do I get my employees to open up on things that aren't working?
Experience has shown that employees will only tell managers when their policies and procedures aren't working when there is trust. If the worker expects that he or she will be ignored or told to follow the established standard, you can bet they won't say anything. Thanks for tuning into this episode by Safety Up. Today we talked about identifying hazards and risks. In the next podcast, we'll examine how understanding variation is key to hazard identification. You can support us by clicking like and subscribe. Take care, everyone, and until next time.